This is International Master Eric Kislik. Now let's look at the round 6 decisive game between Wesley So and Aronian. Aronian was presumably planning to play the Marshal, and Wesley So stuck to his standard e4 and played it very principally. He put Aronian under a lot of pressure, sacrificed a pawn, and played almost perfectly. I think he made 2 small mistakes, but his play was very strong and very practical. It was also very easy to understand, so it'll be easy to kind of follow and sort of grasp what he was aiming for. So let's go through the moves here. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, a6. Just a standard Ruy Lopez. White goes rook e1, black goes b5, bishop e3, castle. And white opted for a4. And I've played this personally myself. One of the issues in the Ruy Lopez is that in the main lines where you play c3 and aim for d4, generally speaking, those lines are worked out very, very deeply, and so it's easy to understand why white might play a4 and aim for a slightly different kind of pawn structure and oftentimes look for kind of new ideas. I think Wesley So maybe didn't demonstrate a brand new idea in this game, but he knew exactly how he wanted to play it, and he had good chances of fighting for an advantage. So after b4, he played the move a5. I've personally played this myself against numerous grandmasters and tournament games. So the idea is that you fix the pawn on a6 as a potential weakness, which you might be able to target much later in the game, for example, with bishop c4 or with queen e2 at some point. And, it just makes it a little bit difficult for black because he has to keep a watchful eye on it. So now black played d6, and he was planning to play bishop e6 to challenge the b3 bishop. White went d3. And black went bishop to e6. So I played a different plan myself against Grandmaster Levente Vojta, who's about 2600. Personally, I played knight b to d2, rook to b8, knight c4, but after my opponent played knight to d7, his position was very solid and objectively not bad. For instance, he has the idea of playing knight c5, so this is objectively equal. So Wesley played bishop takes e6, and after f takes e6, he played knight b d2, which is as good as anything else. He's aiming to play c3 and d4 eventually, and he may throw in knight to b3 first to try to prepare d4 under better circumstances. So black has a couple plans. He can play rook b8 here, or he can play queen e8. Some people play queen e8, sometimes with the idea of bringing the queen to the king side via g6 or f7 or h5. So he played rook to b8. And if white plays c3, for instance, h6, d4, queen e8 after knight to c4, black can play rook to b5 and has no objective problems. So in the game, he went for knight to b3, and black went queen c8. Queen c8 is a move that you might not understand without an explanation. So one of the ideas is that he's freeing the d8 square. So for instance, if bishop to e3, he can just go knight to d8. And after rook f1, knight f7, knight g5, for instance, black can play c5, restricting d4. So in the game, he actually played the same plan. And if white goes d4, he can go knight d7. And if d5, he can play knight d8, again taking advantage of the fact that the queen is not on the d8 square. So queen c8 is a nice little calm, consolidating positional move. After h3, knight d8 was played, preparing to play c5, which is what he did. Bishop to e3. Developing and eventually preparing to try to play d4 under good circumstances. c5, knight b to d2. So his knight didn't really have anything else to do there and had to go back. And now he's preparing to go c3 on the next move. So knight c6 was played, and then c3, and now rook to b5. And I had this kind of problem when I played against Grandmaster Vojta. I had the issue of how do I defend that a5 pawn. Here, Wesley So made a very principled decision to give up the pawn. And I think there was probably no way to defend it anyway, but he gets very good compensation. And part of the reason why he gets very good compensation is because 2 tempi are needed to capture that a5 pawn. So basically, black is spending almost half a pawn in value just to regain the pawn. I mean, just to capture the pawn, I should say. So you'll see that white builds up a little bit of an initiative. Black has slightly clumsy pieces, and he also always has to watch the a6 pawn. So you'll see how this plays out. Personally, I think what may have been easier, he played e takes d4 now, I think what may have been easier might have just been to play take, 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 and then c4. And now, if knight takes c4, which is probably the best move, we can just play knight takes e4. And if knight b6, then simply queen e8, and black has everything covered. He's captured the e4 pawn, and he has no objective problems. So this is probably easier in a practical game and doesn't involve chasing any material. So let's see what happened here. Takes, knight takes a5. This was objectively perfectly okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it was a little bit more difficult to play than b takes c3 on move 18. So White had a couple ways he could play. He could have also played rook c1, and with this idea of trying to play for e5. This would have been very interesting with the idea of take. Although after queen to d5 and bishop takes c5, I think the position is approximately equal. Take, knight takes e5, and then queen b5 is a good move. Probably we just reach an equal endgame. So in the game, I think he played the best practical chance. I think Wesley So played this very well. So d takes c5, d takes c5. He could go rook c1, but then again, just queen to b7. If knight g5 attacking e6, simply queen c6 and everything is under control. So he went rook to a2. And now he's threatening to go queen to e2 and then rook e to a1. So black has some issues with that a5 knight. So now, actually, the computer suggestion here was to go knight d7, queen e2, knight b8. A little bit subtle, but he is trying to reroute his pieces. For example, knight e5, knight b c6, knight c4, take. I could see this as equalizing for black for sure. So maybe that would have been the best way to play it. Although, a little bit difficult to see the idea of maneuvering the knight all the way to c6 when it's on f6, which is seemingly not a very bad square. So queen to b7 was played. I like the move b3 played by White. So now he has the plan of just playing queen to c2, defending the e4 pawn, and then going rook ea1. So one of the points is, if takes, take, there's bishop g5. And then after queen b7, there's rook d2 with this idea of coming into d7. So that's why that pawn couldn't be captured. You might have been wondering, why couldn't he just take on e4? Well, that's why. And probably the best now would have just been to go knight d7, and if queen e2, then simply h6, covering the g5 square, keeping everything under control. If e5, there's queen d5. Here it looks like black has everything under control, and the position is very close to equal. Probably White is just a little bit better here. So he played king h8, which probably was probably just a dubious move. It wasted time, and the king actually ends up not being safer over there. So White goes queen c2. Black probably should have just played rook c8 and then rook ea1, bishop d8, knight g5. Here he can try to sacrifice with c4, try to get some play. For example, take, b3, queen to b2, take. And now White's probably just a little bit better. It's 4 versus 4 in terms of pawns. Black has 2 isolated pawns, but this is pretty close to being equal. Black will have his best drawing chances here for sure. So you'll see what happened in the game. He went knight d7, White went rook ea1, bishop d8, knight c4. All right, so the a5 knight has to make a decision, has to capture. Takes. Bishop f6, attacking the rook on a1, so he goes to the open file, rook d1, queen c6. So this was one of Wesley So's mistakes in the game, one of his 2 mistakes, in my opinion. After queen c6, he played rook a d2. What would have been very strong, which was very easy to miss, was bishop to f4, which is a really strong move, planning to go rook to d6. So if e5, he can go bishop g5. He may have missed this. So now White's threat is to go bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, knight to g5, which can be quite powerful. And if knight b6, there's queen c1, take, and the e5 pawn is very weak. White will probably win that. So in the game, rook a d2 was played, knight b6, queen c2. So now I think his best chance was just to go queen c8. And now after e5, bishop e7, bishop g5, one of the points is there's no knight d4. And knight d4 was played in the game because black simply made an oversight. You'll see why in a few moves. But in this case, I think black is doing fine. After rook d6, he can go knight to d5. Seems like he's able to hold on here. So in the game, after queen c7, you'll see this. He was probably a bit shocked by what happened here. So after he faced e5, he went bishop e7 and knight d4. He may have simply missed this move because his rook on b5 is in trouble and the c-pawn is pinned to the queen. So if, for example, queen takes e5, takes, rook e2. I was thinking of just playing rook d e1. And this position, it's a little bit hard to judge. It's not quite clear if White's going to be able to win this, but he definitely has a big advantage. So this would have definitely given White very good winning chances. But that was Black's best defense by far. So in the game, he went rook to c8, knight takes e6, queen takes e5. And here's another one of the moments where I think Wesley So made a small mistake. But I have to admit, the correct move was very, very difficult. One of the grandmasters pointed it out on ICC during the commentary. So if rook to d6, this is just an amazing move. I mean, the basic point is if bishop takes d6, we have knight g5. We're threatening queen takes h7 mate, and we're also threatening knight f7. So in this case, it's just game over. So yeah, he just faces this problem that he's not able to cover everything, and white immediately wins. So that rook d6 move is very shocking when you see it, but then once you understand why, you go, oh, okay, I see exactly why it works. So after c4, simply bishop to d4, take, and then rook takes d6 and queen d1. And if rook d5, we can just retreat the bishop with bishop to d4, and here we can play, for example, knight g5 check is a nice move. We break the pin with rook takes g5 and go bishop takes b6, and white has a winning position. So this, I admit, was quite difficult to see, but is a really beautiful move. One of the reasons why I wanted to analyze this game was I wanted to look at that rook d6 move and just see if there was any possible defense, and there really isn't. It's just an incredibly powerful move and a beautiful win. So after knight to f4, yeah, I thought he should just play king to g8, and then after queen to d3, he could play rook f8. Here he kind of has everything under control. There's not really anything that white can do to black's position. All of the weaknesses are covered. So what black really needed to think about was, how do I patch up my weaknesses and keep everything under control? And you'll see in the game, he's simply not able to. So rook f8 was a mistake. White was simply able to go rook to e2. So now, for instance, if bishop f6, g3, c4, if we reach something like this, black is simply not able to defend. So in the game, queen to c3 was played. Here I think simply queen a2 would have been very strong, and then if rook a8, we go knight e6, threatening the knight c7, so if c4, we just go bishop d4, take, knight c7 is winning for white. So in the game, queen b1 was also very strong, hard to criticize. So queen f6 was played, and white went bishop to c1. He was preparing to go bishop to b2. Another very strong move was to go queen e4, and now he also has the same idea of going bishop c1. So if knight c8, bishop c1, here he can go knight to d5. So this is a nice little trick, and then he can just go rook de1. So white's totally winning in that case. After bishop c1, probably black's best bet was to go knight f7, or queen f7, and then knight e6, rook g8, queen a1. This is definitely going to be losing for black anyway. For instance, takes, queen takes a6. He's in big trouble here as well. So white's going to take the c5 pawn, going to be at least up a pawn, have a pretty big advantage in the endgame. For instance, if h6, it's probably going to be up 2 pawns. Takes, rook c2. So I think he'll lose the endgame quite easily down 2 pawns. So c4 was played, was a mistake, but he was still objectively losing. So takes, rook e6 was very strong, and now he's simply losing material. So if queen f5, we can just take it and take on e7. So queen to g5 was really the only move. Now there was a very strong move pointed out by Engines here of simply going rook to d7. This is nice because white has a bunch of tactics based on black's weak back rank. So after bishop f6, we can go rook f7. If rook b to b8, we play take, and if rook c8, queen takes c4. The queen cannot be captured because of the e8 square. So quite a simple continuation there, but it's very easy to understand how it was missed, especially judging by the move number. It was probably time trouble here. So anyway, and he probably assumed he was winning after knight g6 check quite easily, which arguably he was. So queen takes g6, take, queen to e4, very nice move, attacking the undefended c4 knight and the undefended bishop on e7. So here, if knight e5, we have f4. That's the key point. So if check and knight f7, we go queen takes g6, bishop to d6, and king h1, and black will not be able to hang on here. One threat is just to simply go bishop to b2, so I don't think he has any chances of holding on here. So bishop f6, and now we just take the piece. So white has a little bit of difficulty in converting this, but I think he converted it beautifully. So he went bishop a3, attacking the rook, rook fb8, rook b1, b2, and now h4. So he's not going to have any problems with his king. He might go g4 sooner or later. He might go g4, g5. He might go h5. So rook a5 was played. White went queen to d3. So he's actually threatening to go rook takes b2 because there are also some tactics if black takes here, because there's the check with queen d8 check and queen takes a5 after black takes twice on b2. So queen to d3 has some good threats to it. And if, for instance, king to g8, I'll just go ahead with g4. And if rook a to b5, there's no more pressure on the a3 bishop, so we can just go queen takes g6. So now rook to d8 was played, queen b3, rook c8, queen b7, hitting the rook again, rook to d8. So he repeated moves a few times, and finally he deviated with queen b4, and after rook b5, queen g4, hitting the rook again. And yeah, now there was really no good answer. So he went rook to c3, and then bishop takes b2 was a very strong move. So if rook c5, we simply go queen e2. I just wanted to play out the line here just to kind of illustrate how white wins this. So after rook to b4, we go rook c1, take, rook takes, queen takes. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to slowly advance and eventually win the g6 pawn. So I just played out a few moves, but eventually black will be unable to avoid losing the g6 pawn, and white will slowly win it. So basically at this point, black's slowly running out of moves and is going to start losing a pawn, and then white's going to keep pushing him back further and further. So rook takes b2, rook takes b2, check. So bishop takes b2, queen takes g6, rook a1. He tries to hold on to that last pawn, but you'll see what happens after g4. If he goes rook a5, I just go king to g2, and then I take the pawn on the next move. So a5 was played, check. Queen to b5, hitting the bishop. Bishop a3. So now I think the fastest would have been check. Then if king f8, he can go check, and then g5, rook d1, queen f3, and this will be the best way to convert the win. So anyway, he played queen e5, which was definitely good enough to win. He's slowly just kind of maneuvering and preparing to try to win the a5 pawn. So rook d1 was played, check, check, queen a8, check. So now he picked off the pawn. And if bishop e7, just to illustrate what white can play here, he gets to play these checks. He gets to go g5, h5. There's a funny little win here in a few moves. We go h6, take, rook h7, king g5, rook takes h6, take, king takes, and then we win the king and pawn endgame by getting opposition. So there's some funny little lines for how we can convert the win here. So anyway, bishop d6 check, he just moved the king, rook d4, queen f5 check. So g5 is the best way to do it. He went queen to g6, queen f5 check. He defends the pawn with king h3, rook d6, and now he gets to play f4. So he's making progress move by move. The win is going to come very, very soon. Check, queen e5, rook b4, king g4, defending the f4 pawn, king f8, check. Even faster would have been check, and then queen to c6 check, king e7, queen c5 check, but doesn't really matter. Queen e6, rook d4, queen e5, and Aronian resigned. This was a great game by Wesley So. It was really important for him to fight back after having 2 losses, and really excellent Ruy Lopez play. He played very principally. He put his opponent under pressure. He may have missed a few easier wins and a couple of stronger moves, but it didn't really matter. He completely outplayed him, and it was a great game. Hope you enjoyed the content, and subscribe for more.